For all being here today. As Joyce said, my name is Samantha Tremlett. I'm a licensed independent clinical social worker, and I'm here with Michelle, who's waving. Go ahead, Michelle.
Hi, everybody. It's nice to be with you here today.
Both Michelle and myself are licensed independent clinical social workers, which just means that we work with kids and families and children, as um, the slide showed. We both work with people with families in Wellesley and as also in the surrounding towns in different practices. We're going to go through kind of our presentation for today. So, as I said, we are Samantha Tremlett and Michelle DeSantis. We work with many different kids with many different needs and diagnoses. Michelle works in the schools, and so also she supports teachers and in that setting. And I work in private practice, so I support families kind of in that way. We'd love to hear a little bit about you. If you can, there's a little chat here on Teams, and just kind of put your name and your role, what camp you're at. We'd love to hear kind of what's bringing you in today, what the reasons for any questions you have or something you'd like for us to talk about. Just take a minute to do that, and that would be great. If anyone can. Couple stompers, nature exploration. Okay, great. Hi, Melissa. Thanks for joining us. Lionheart Volleyball Club, Youth Volleyball Camp. Okay, so we've got a wide variety here. Okay, awesome. Great. Okay. I love that there's a wide variety of camps here. Um, and the wide variety of ages it looks like, which is great because we're kind of going to talk about lots of things going on with kids at this point. So thank you for sharing that. Here is kind of a summary of what we're going to cover. Um, we're going to talk about how to connect with campers, some diagnoses that we see and then we think might impact your campers, how to support like the transition from the school year to the summer, how to respond to behaviors, especially like more high conflict situations, and then also how to support families and caregivers with some of these goals. So when you think about the summer and kind of starting from the beginning, I'm sure most of you know this already, but connecting yourself with the campers is really important, building rapport, really establishing yourself and your counselors as safe people, building trust with predictability, in connecting with campers and like discovering their interest and sharing emotions. I think it's really helpful for kids to hear from adults as well that like maybe they're nervous about the summer or things are challenging for them, like in appropriate ways. It's helpful because I think the transition can be challenging for kids. So it's good for them to hear like, yeah, I'm nervous about this activity or I'm nervous about whatever it is, because I think kids want to see that like, it's normal to be nervous or normal to have certain feelings, or they're feeling hot or tired or whatever it is, or things that might come up for kids. And then just another thing to be aware of is just kind of keeping equity on mind and being aware of nicknames. I think it can be really easy for returning campers to feel like super relaxed and comfortable coming back from the summer, but then some of those newer campers may not have that connection with the older counselors or whoever they've been there before. So just being aware of that is something I kind of like to highlight. We just have like a find a friend bingo example. This is a good strategy to kind of use to help kids connect with one another, help counselors connect with kids, or however you want to use it. It's just an example to kind of help the camp community come together. In terms of supporting camper adjustment, I think there's a little bit more there's a lot you can do to support the transition. As I mentioned, going from the school year to the summer can be triggering for some kids. It's just a big change from what they're expected day to day to the summer. And I think for some kids, sometimes, they love camp and they love being around kids in the summer, but they also want like a little more free time in the summer. So just knowing that it might be hard to go from like a full day of school to then right to camp for a full summer, even though like they're going to enjoy their summer. There's a change in schedule, something important to remember, and the heat can get to kids too. Consider like maybe having a brief get to know you form for families. I don't know if camps do that, but it's helpful to kind of have that so the kids and the parents and the families can share kind of what's going on with their kid. These are just some examples. It's just helpful for people to know kind of things their kid enjoys, things their kid doesn't enjoy, whatever is going on in that family. And the parents will share kind of hopefully what they feel comfortable sharing with you. Another thing to think about is check-ins throughout the summer. I think it's really helpful to kind of make that a point for counselors to do, especially for those kids that maybe aren't going to come forth and share their feelings right away. Some kids are a little more shy or a little more reserved, and so getting that one-on-one time with a counselor can be really helpful, or, another comfortable staff that they might have. In terms of, comfortable staff, I think, camp has so many options for people to connect with kids, with adults, with campers, like all the different connections are possible. And I remember myself when I went to camp, I had like a big sister type, and it was someone else I didn't really know, and it just kind of gave me someone I could go to ask questions and kind of build that connection. So consider something like that. When you're like introducing the summer or starting the summer. And another thing just to keep in mind is sometimes, some family, I mean, every family is working through some things differently, and sometimes they may come to camp without the necessary, food or materials or whatever it is. And I think it's important to just kind of address that with gentle curiosity, ask open questions about what might be helpful. It could have been a busy morning, it could have been, something else going on. They were traveling, what have you. So just kind of being aware that like when someone shows up without something, it doesn't always mean they don't have it. It might mean that, but just kind of being curious, sending a note home, connecting with the caregiver, kind of checking in with the child about why they may not be having what they need for the day. In terms of what we see in terms with our kids in the community, there's a lot of different diagnoses that you may come across, and sometimes parents will share, and sometimes they won't, and they'll share, midway through the summer, which I know can be challenging if there's challenges you're seeing. So there's, trauma, ADHD, depression, anxiety. These are kind of the more common ones. You'll see oftentimes kids present with multitude like autism diagnosis of what is in addition to anxiety. So you might see kind of a lot of stuff going on for a child. And then the two things that I did this presentation 2 years ago. So coming from then, I've noticed a little bit of an increase in some other diagnoses. One of them is called ARFID, which is avoidant restricted food intake disorder. And it's basically like when a child has a really, really hard time eating for a multitude of reasons, and they may come to camp with, every day Doritos and Nutella, for example. That doesn't mean that they aren't getting what they need at home. It just means that those are their safe foods. So just kind of, if you're seeing patterns like this, it might be helpful to check in because sometimes, kids present with difficulties. They don't want the popsicle, and it's not because they don't like it. It's because they're afraid of throwing up or something like that. That might be the root of the root cause. And then OCD obviously is a big one as well, obsessive compulsive disorder, which can present in a multitude of ways. It's not necessarily just frequent hand washing, as people kind of know it to be. It can be obsessive thoughts or things like that. It can be heightened anxiety. So I think these are all things to know and just have in the background if a family decides to share with you, or if a kid decides to share with you as well. Despite the fact that there's all these diagnoses, every child presents differently and has different abilities and different needs. So remembering that as well and providing the individualized support when you can. Um, you know, Building relationships is so very key, and I think every child wants to feel respected and valued and part of the group, even if they may not appear that way all the time. That's really something that they do want. I know I have this image here. It's called the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, something we learned in graduate school and review often. It's just the idea that, there are basic needs, especially in the summer. I think these things come up a lot. They're tired, they're hot, they're hungry, they're all those things are happening. And so you may see behaviors that would be challenging, but that could be for basic need reasons as opposed to something more elevated. Once those things are met, then it's helpful. It's easier for a kid to connect with you on the higher levels of the triangle. But it's just something to keep in mind. In terms of prevention, as I mentioned before, relationships and rapport are really, really important. When a kid feels safe, it's a lot easier for them to connect with you, follow directions. If they feel that, you are trusting them, and they have the respect from you, the campers, the counselors and the directors, then they'll be more willing to kind of pitch in and join in with the group. I think a really good thing to practice is just having like little songs or activities for kids to do, whether that's just like, I see it in schools, like they count by fives, just like in break times, because downtime can be a opportunity for kids to kind of get into it with another child or, just kind of not be able to focus. And so if there's a little bit of a downtime and not every kid is having a friend at every moment, it's good to have something small to kind of go off of in that moment. Um, that being said, consistent routines are really helpful. And I think for kids especially, like they may complain, we always have music on Tuesdays or whatever it is, but getting that routine can be really, really good for them. And just getting them, comfortable and knowing what to expect can kind of minimize anxiety. Coming in with like a visual schedule or a reminder at the start of the day, what they're going to have can be really helpful. As I said before, doing regular check-ins is helpful. This is a feelings thermometer that I often use when I'm working with kids, just kind of getting them to sense to check in with themselves and how they're feeling. And you can share, as well, how you're feeling. And I think it's really great for kids to see that adults have all these feelings too. And just because you're angry doesn't mean that you need to get, kind of, you can be angry and also be in control of your feelings. And just kind of modeling that for kids is really helpful. Teaching coping skills is also really important, and I'll kind of go into that in a little bit, but I think it's really good for kids to have coping strategies, whether that's breathing or, counting, or other things that they can do during downtimes, and kind of stressing that they can do that, during moments that aren't necessarily, not only during moments of stress, but moments of more like peace and relaxation, because then when they are in the moment of stress, they're able to do it. So that can be a game that you can play about like, everyone find five blue things or something like that. And I'll show you kind of examples in a second. I feel like I'm talking a lot and saying a lot. So if there are any questions, I should have said this before, feel free to stop me, ask a question, whatever. I'm happy to answer. When it comes to setting up rules and expectations, I think there's a few things to really think about. Rules, explaining to kids why we have rules. Rules help us stay safe. They help us have fun. They make sure everyone can enjoy the summer. Just kind of key reasons why is helpful for them. And then asking them, why do you think we should have rules? What rules do you think we should have? I mean, I would say most kids in school will set up rules on the first day of school, so they know that they have rules and they have to have them, and they might know why they have them. They, to stay safe, to learn, whatever the reason may be. I used to work in a school in Wellesley, and we had this acronym called SOAR, which was safety, outstanding effort, always be kind, and respect to yourself and others. The idea was that it was all connected to our mascot, which was an eagle, but the idea was that each letter you could earn a feather for it. So if another kid saw you being safe or doing outstanding effort, you would get a feather, you'd bring it to the office, and then you would collect those feathers. And it was a really great way for other kids to catch kids doing the right thing and for kids to feel, motivated. At the end of the week, the principal would share off the feathers from different things, and kids, different, classrooms or, bunks, whatever you want to call them, could compete against others to see how many feathers they got. And then it was just a good way to kind of have a reinforcement system that was already in place. I think doing something like that makes it fun can help kids really enjoy, give them some camp spirit as well. Some another, some example of some rules that you might consider, and I'm sure you have plenty of them, is, respect others by using kind words, keeping your hands to yourself, trying to create a positive rather than a negative. So instead of saying don't run in the hallway, you might say like we walk in the hallway, we have a safe body, just so that kids know what is expected of them. And it's really helpful in that way. So here are some visuals that I was talking about, kind of things you can use for brain breaks or for downtime or when it's really hot or whatever is going on. There's different breathing activities, grounding activities. These are just some examples that, I use in my practices and they use in schools. So kids are kind of aware of these ideas. You can use 5-finger breathing, and then, teaching this to kids or reviewing it and seeing if they have any ideas. Because I feel like at this point in time, kids are aware of these types of activities, and might even be an opportunity for one child to teach the group about something that they know. So we have 5-finger breathing, grounding techniques, and then just some other types of breathing opportunities. On the next slide, we have some more like feeling identification activities or slides that we use. This emotion zones of regulation is very common in schools. A lot of kids know about it. They know like the different zones, the green, blue, yellow, red zone. So they're aware of that, and it's a helpful familiar language that you could use to kind of help the kids know kind of what's going on and help them check in with themselves. And then another one that is really popular is a little spot of feelings. There's books, there's plushies. I mean, you can go, there's a lot of fun stuff you can do with this content. And I think these images are really common and kids know about them and they know the stories. So, finding ways to kind of be familiar with things that maybe the kids are learning or kids the language the kids have, having them check in, like what zone are you in? Your body is seeming a little bit heightened right now, kind of going through that point of view. Is there any questions up until this point? I'm going to switch it over to Michelle, and she's going to take it from here.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Sam. Again, I'm so glad to be with you all in conversation today. And I know like kids are already talking about their summer plans and camps. And, whenever I reconnect with them in August and September, they are so proud and so excited to share their camp experiences with myself and, their classroom communities. And so thank you so much for the important work that you're doing, providing all that enrichment and structure during the summertime. So, with that being said, in terms of setting consistent interventions and consequences for challenging behaviors, being able to clearly explain the expectations and what happens if the rules aren't followed, I would say that can be super helpful for a preview, as in kind of like what Sam was talking about. If you kind of pre-teach what the expectation is, the hope is that you can kind of get everybody on the right track and keep going in that direction. Um, and you really, when you have to use it in a more responsive way, using responses that are fair, immediate, and focused on like learning and repair, the strategy or the positive agreement that they want to do next can go a long way. And so, like, that might look like something like at camp, we keep our hands to ourselves. Like, if someone uses their hands in an unsafe way, the first step is a reminder and a chance to try again. And so that way you're kind of marking the moment, like communicating the expectation and providing the reassurance to others on, what the logical consequence may be. And I have to say, like when that preview and the follow through is consistent with the expectations, this provides such a sense of safety and consistency to campers, as well as, providing counselors a sense of confidence to know what to do when something comes up, right? If we all follow the same recipe, at the end of the day, we get the same cake. And so I also think about, like fair and immediate responses, kind of a quick mark the moment, like stop and pause. Like I saw some sports camps here. So like maybe like I noticed the ball was thrown at someone's face. Like show me how you can throw the ball safely so everyone can keep playing. And, I think with that being said, the consequence for not following a rule like once is should be different than a consequence for like multiple instances, right? And thinking about, how can you like respond to that one time, two-time instance and kind of prompt the skill. But then perhaps if it's more of a pattern, that might be a situation where whether it's an alternative activity or, kind of finding that threshold for when they have to stop and, they're showing that they're not ready to play and what it means to reenter, what that could look like. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. But, um, I also think viewing challenging behavior as communicating a need is like a helpful way to like stay grounded and compassionate in those moments, and using like to say something like it looks like your body's having a hard time right now. Like you can take a quick stretch break or I can help you get started. I would avoid like a yes or no question unless you are ready to get a no. So if you kind of prompt it and remove that like do you language, that might help, kind of keep the kid engaged in the conversation. In terms of like using a tiered approach when you're providing support and redirection, that might look like chunking it for them. So like first I'll give a reminder. If you're still having a hard time practicing your self-control, like then we're going to take a short break and practice whatever the expectation is, whatever the activity is before rejoining the group. Um, and again, that consistency is just so important, as well as sharing the expectations and approaches with campers and families. And so, if you're having kind of a challenging time, that could be an opportunity to say to the caregiver, we've noticed that transitions between activities can be tough throughout the day. Have you found anything at home that helps your child move on from one activity to the next? Because then it kind of invites the family into the conversation and can kind of take the situation and help everybody kind of hold their part. And so, sometimes if, like I said, there is more of a pattern or a consistent need, or challenge, you might need to make more of a plan rather than previewing only or responding in the moment. So like let's make a plan so Sam can be successful. So like a visual schedule perhaps so that they could see, what is coming up and how they, to help them with their manager expectations, or a check-in with the counselor before the group activity where they can like preview the expectation, get the reminder from the camper so that they can ask for help when they need it. Next slide, please, Sam. All right. In terms of responding to challenging behaviors, again, that consistency and fairness when following the camp expectations is key. Uh, when we're at camp, we have walking feet. Let's reset and try that again. And so that way too, that the consequence is, being able to make up the time missed and practice the skills so that they can do it when it's needed. Um, and sometimes, when they are upset in the sense of, behavior communicating a need, listening to the campers and validating their feelings is kind of like my first step. Like just even simply labeling the feeling, like I can see you're really frustrated right now. So you can start to activate that mind body connection. Um, and I keep this in my framework, but sometimes I will say it to like maybe grades 3 and above, in the sense of, all feelings are okay. Or like those zones. Like we move through our zones all day long. Like I wake up and I'm super tired, and then I have my coffee and I'm feeling a little more excited. And now I'm with you and I'm like feeling good to go, like for our check-in. And so all of those feelings are okay, like even when the behavior needs to change. And so like it's okay to feel angry, but it's not okay to push. And so helping them name their feelings can help them identify what they need next. So, how are you feeling? Are you feeling this? Maybe showing, like the little zones picture, and then giving a prompt, like offering that help strategy and then giving a prompt to a skill that can be used to kind of regulate that feelings thermometer, that body temperature with some skills. Next slide, Sam. Um, and, I think in those moments, staying calm, neutral, and in control of your own emotions is super important. Like you are the anchor in that moment, or whoever's interacting with that child. And so, you know, helping them co-regulate by speaking slowly, like keeping your tone steady and modeling the calm you want to see is a way to activate some of those mirror neurons, and also kind of match. Sometimes like if I have a kid like screaming in my face, like I may even like lower my volume and like increase the wait time between prompts so that they have to like eventually start to shape so that they're matching me. Um, Redirecting briefly and returning the group to the activity. Like, let's get back to the game. I'll check in with you in a minute. I think that that's key. I don't know if this has come up in camps, but a lot of times when I'm processing like a conflict with students in the classroom, sometimes like the impacted students will kind of say like, well, they always do that, or like, they never get in trouble. Like they just do these things, and like then they just get to play the game. And so having that balancing act of, being able to provide more of like the check-in privately with the student to respect their privacy, but also marking the moment for the community to acknowledge like, hey, like that's not okay. Like, we're going to keep going, and I'm going to talk to this person later. Can be a nice way to balance those two things. You're attending to the community impact, but then also respecting like the person who's having a hard time. And so looking for patterns in behavior can be really helpful so that you're kind of trying to see if it's predictable, it's preventable. And so, rather than feeling like, oh, like this just happened, paying attention to those vulnerabilities. Like, okay, our transitions from the weekend hard. Like Monday always feels a lot harder than, Friday. Or like waiting turns, waiting between activities, loud spaces perhaps from a sensory perspective. And so that way, if it's something that you can anticipate, perhaps that adjustment can be made, or that could be the opportunity that perhaps the check-in with the counselor would be most helpful. Next one, please. Thanks. And so when I think about dysregulation, I really use this metaphor of a window of tolerance. Like if you have a window and it's open, campers really learn best and problem solve best when they're in that window of tolerance, right? Like the air can flow in, the air can flow out. And however, when a camper is outside of their window, we want to focus on regulation before correction. So let's say like if an emotion becomes too intense, right? And they're like hyper aroused, like they're up here, they're in that fight mode, they're in that flight mode. Or they're under hypoaroused and they're, shutting down more of like a freeze response, they may not be able to process instructions or feedback in that moment. And so that's why that sort of dysregulation is a cue to, okay, we need that like a coping skill, like Sam had included in some earlier slides. And so, I'm a big like believer in like trying to remember, give myself little anchor points too. So I always tell myself like regulation before correction. Like let's take a few breaths together. Let's just step outside for a minute. When your body feels calmer, then we'll figure out what to do next. I give that mini preview, a when then, a first then, an if then. Because again, your calm presence helps bring campers back into their window. And so that's simple directions, the steady voice, the supportive choices. And sometimes even a forced choice prompt can be helpful in that moment if you're trying to give that kiddo a sense of control that they're like looking for, but in a more adaptive way, so that they can choose from your selected choices. Do you want to sit with me for a minute or get a drink of water before we rejoin the group? This or that. Next slide, Sam. And so when we think about behavioral dysregulation, this cycle, the escalation cycle here, is a great visual for depicting like what we see on the outside, like that behavioral output. And I will say like this cycle is like just one example. It's almost like a bit of a bell curve. Like every person is different though. Like for some, like the acceleration can be super like accelerated, like almost vertical, and like the peak can be much higher. Or, the level of how long it takes to de-escalate can all look a little bit different. But all of that being said, behavior usually escalates in stages and not all at once. And, it kind of, when we recognize those early signs, we can respond in ways that help campers, return to regulation. I always like to say, like, it does not have to be a level 5 problem, like an emergency to ask for help. If like a tiny problem, like dropping your pencil, like picking it up is a way simpler, solution than like holding on and, letting things kind of escalate and then responding up here. And so the goal would really be to help campers regulate, reconnect, and return to the activity. And so, like, when they're at their calm, there may be a trigger that then promotes the agitation to then more acceleration as things kind of can escalate. You get to your peak behavior. And then once that like behavioral release happens, the entering the stage of de-escalation and then sometimes some depletion, depending on like how intense the behavior is or if it's, kind of like tantrum like before they reach a stable point of recovery. So we're going to stop and, talk about like some certain parts of this next. So next slide. Okay, so in terms of a trigger, I mean, everybody's triggers are different. Some things that I see a lot in schools I feel like can overlap with camp is like losing a game. Again, those waiting or transitions, loud environments. Feeling excluded from peers is a big one, especially with our savvier, older, kind of kiddos. And then thinking about, some more of those basic needs, like that Maslow's hierarchy of needs that Sam mentioned, hunger, fatigue, homesickness. Like if that foundation is not stable, then you're kind of driving a car on like half a tank of gas. And so having awareness of the triggers helps staff anticipate behaviors rather than reacting and trying to make sure that those bases are covered first or whatever environmental controls that may be possible to like think about those. Sometimes we like I'm trying to think what could be transferable. Like if we have like our cafeteria can get really loud. It's in the like the basement. And so like things echo really intensely. And so sometimes we might have like a quiet lunch. So then that way, we're kind of avoiding the stressors that then can derail the afternoon. Next one. All right, moving on to like that agitation stage. So, what you might see like a camper appearing frustrated or perhaps upset or withdrawn. And they might be like complaining about the activity or maybe refusing to do it altogether in a raised voice, or that task initiation difficulty, right? Like difficulty starting or continuing the activity. In those moments with that presentation, what they need is to feel heard and supported and help identifying what they need rather than kind of sitting in that um, kind of fixed mindset. And so some things you can do to respond to that to meet those needs is validate the feelings, offer simple choices, and help them communicate. So like I can see something is bothering you, or would it help to take a quick walk or have help getting started? Again, that two item forced prompt. Or perhaps like even like what do you need right now? Just offering like help strategies and prompt strategies as well to prompt them to start moving in that forward state. And then, as we kind of go along the cycle here, the escalating stage, now we're going to put the campers in a point of acceleration. That might be where you're seeing more, like more escalated behavior. So like perhaps yelling or pacing, clenched fists, arguing with peers or camp staff, or ignoring directions altogether. And so when that happens, then supporting the camper to regulate their bodies and emotions, that's a signal like they're not ready for basketball. They're not ready for volleyball. Like when you're like yelling, like that is a time to like take a step back. And so what you can do, redirect to that like in the moment calming choice, perhaps offering a break away from the group if it's becoming disruptive. And again, just like cutting out language, like giving short, simple directions and keeping time between prompts. I mean, I'd say like maybe even like 30 seconds, a minute. When you get to the peak, that's when you're using more of a wait strategy and just like really being more intentional with prompt delivery. But some of those phrases could look like let's step outside for a minute or grab some water, we'll check in, what's going on? Or even, prompting them to do one of like a calming choice, like with you as part of the process. Next one, please, Sam. Oh, but wait, there are additional strategies. So perhaps like some students really, might have like a little fidget or but again, you got to be careful because tools can sometimes become toys or like kind of social currency. So again, time and place, whatever makes sense for your environment. But something, to be able to get some of that movement or that work out can be helpful. A short move and break out of the environment so that you're kind of removing them from triggers can be a choice as well. Or perhaps, journaling, drawing, something that can be like an in the moment distraction to change the thought channel, right? When I change what I think about, I change how I feel, just to kind of like get them back, like take them off the track and then, point them, like help them refocus their attention usefully um, to move them into that forward state. All right, next one. And so now we are at the top of our escalation cycle, the peak. And so this is really when you would see the most acute unsafe behavior, intense yelling, crying, leaving the area. I mean, everyone's like behavioral repertoire is so different, but ultimately they're unable to respond to any directions. And so in that moment, that is not really a time to, direct to a strategy, talk too much, do that top down thinking. Like they flip their lid from like a brain standpoint. And so right now what they need is that safety and space to calm down. And so, again, like as the adult, you are the anchor point, like like the co-regulator in that moment. So staying calm, minimizing that talking. You may, like kind of clear some space around the camper if needed. If there's like say you're doing an art activity and there's like scissors on the table next door, like maybe like moving those away. Um, and just being able to give space while staying nearby, maintaining that supervision for safety and having additional staff, whatever that um, team response may, look best in your setting. And so a lot of those times I am, again, even taking language more like further down, more space between support prompts and just simply reassuring of safety. Like you are safe. How can I help? Or, I'm giving you the time you need. I'm here when you're ready. And focusing first on that regulation and safety. In those moments, say if a kiddo like sometimes like I had a kindergartner a few years back who would like engage in so many property destructions, like wreck the room, but then they'd start like cleaning it up. And so if that's like a behavior, something adaptive that shows that, okay, they're starting to perhaps enter that de-escalation or they're looking for ways to, make sure that we're still good, that then I might comment on, um, "Oh, like, thank you for starting that cleanup, like, would you like, can I help you? Or like, would you like this like box or bucket to kind of like put those things back? I think that's, let's do that." Um, Next click. Ooh, but an important reminder, right? Like when the camper is at that peak escalation, teaching like a skill or like kind of reminding them of the consequence would not be effective yet. They are, like in a place that they're big, like their feelings are in control and that kind of higher level cognitive processing is not available. And so they likely in those moments either like won't hear you or won't be able to really process like the meaning making behind that information and or I mean it could just escalate them further. And so, in that moment, again, regulation before correction, bring them down so that then they can interact and participate with you in whatever repair or problem solving strategies are come next. Next, please. And so, speaking of which, um, as they enter that place of de-escalation and are in more of a recovery mode and often looking to reconnect, some signals you might see to indicate that that's happening is their breathing slows, they may become quiet or tearful. Like I've had kids just like pass out, like fall asleep, if they're just really exhausted, or they're willing to talk again and they begin kind of giving those like small conversational bits to start talking. Um, and so in those moments what that behavior communicates is a need for like start some support rebuilding the relationship and to begin help reflecting on what happened. So you can again you can acknowledge their effort to calm down, be able to provide those mini reinforcement opportunities to shape as they're re-engaging with you. Briefly problem solve together if they're up for it. I think that's like, the campers best as you get to know them and kind of where their flow is and how long kind of that like steady rate of de-escalation may take. But ultimately like helping them rejoin the group in whatever way that looks like. And so being able to say like, thanks for taking the time to calm your body, or for that light problem solving, like what might help next time when you start feeling this way, or let's figure out how you can get back to the activity. Next slide, Sam. And so, as a kind of general rule, like I think keeping in mind the escalation cycle is important so like what response strategy would be most effective given where they're at. In terms of like a general framework, or when I'm like supporting students and we talk with our teachers and staff, we talk about our 3 R's. So, because most challenging behaviors aren't necessarily about defiance. They're about like the dysregulation that we just talked about, or some frustration, or, more frustration around unmet needs. And so when we stay calm and connect and like guide campers back to that regulation, we're helping them build those skills, right? That last through camp into the school year and beyond. And so Dr. Bruce Perry has these 3 R's that move through kind of a regulation cycle, keeping like the brain in mind. So kind of moving from like brainstem back up front to that higher thinking when they've reached a state of calm to problem solve. So if I'm interacting with a student who's upset, at first I always try to regulate, like help the camper calm in their body, being able to, take a few deep breaths together, or do a 5 4 3 2 1, or maybe do an ABC around the room, which is like say you pick a category and then you kind of go back and forth. Like Pokemon's a popular one. Like, okay, Pokemon that begins with A, Pokemon that begins with B, Pokemon that begins with C. Um, or simply being able to take a drink of water and start moving and get out of kind of the environment where the trigger is. And then moving up at once they've like kind of reached more of that calm, activating the relationship, or helping them feel connected as if they have help. So to relate, connect, and validate the experience. Like, I hear you're feeling frustrated with that situation, or I'm sorry you're going through this. Like that's really tough. Like, oh, like what a way to start the day. Like that, talk about making a hard situation harder. Like, ugh. Um, and just creating that acceptance. Like we all feel sad sometimes. It's okay. Like I'm here with you. I'm so glad you're here. Like let's like what can we do to make this day at camp the best day it can be? And that kind of leans you into the reason part when you're then at the higher order thinking, problem solving once they are calm. Like so reasoning with them, what could help next time? Or I like to use like a collaborative approach could be like, I wonder if there's a way that we can address like the student's concern or like their complaint and like the adult's concern, which is usually related in some ways to right like health, learning, safety, and asking them like, what do you think? And then sometimes depending on the age, that might be where if I'm working with like my littles, you're like prompting more. It's more of a this or that, or offering the choice of what could be available to help. Next one, please. All right, so thinking about learning from mistakes and how do you debrief with campers after there's been kind of a behavioral or dysregulation kind of episode. And so people do this in different ways, whether it's like reflection sheets or some sort of exit ticket, or, like a reentry conversation like the next day if more time is needed. But again, usually the flow, I like to kind of move in these three steps. So you're able to like help the camper reflect on what happened. And, and sometimes too, if a kiddo, depending on their developmental level, like drawing it out, like drawing can be more available to them versus writing it down and, reading it or versus verbally kind of processing, identifying and processing it. Um, and then understanding the impact, like help the camper connect the actions to the outcomes. And we do that a lot, like in our social emotional learning curriculum, like that perspective taking, the empathy. We start with that as early as kindergarten, like in their little small bites. So, being able to say, like who was affected, like, what happened, like because of your action, like what you did, or like what could they think? Like what could your friend think, like when they heard you say that? And then repairing and moving forward where you can focus on that accountability and skill building. How can you help make things right now? What could you try next time? And I like to think of it as a commitment to a positive agreement moving forward that is aligned with the expectations that were crossed or violated in some way. And so, and I do think sometimes if you have a relationship with the family, having them involved in this process can be very effective. I will give a super big caveat though, if perhaps like there isn't that relationship established or you're at a place of disagreement with like rationale for the camper's behavior and you don't necessarily think that like maybe family won't be so aligned with camp staff or like the adults in the room may split. I would suggest like keeping those conversations private or separate because, for the kid to see the adult split, it can kind of undermine the message. And so that's a consideration. And so again, like when to debrief, like when the camper is calm and regulated, sometimes that's like by the end of the day, or depending on the timing or how intense, like the next day, could be okay for that deep, like this deeper process. And, keeping the tone as curious as possible rather than punitive and focusing on the skills and repairing relationships would be a way to keep it as asset-based as you can when responding to a difficult situation. Next one. And speaking of partnering with families, I always like to start with the strengths, kind of do that kind of positivity sandwich, like share something positive about the camper first. So like my friend Joyce, like Joyce had a great time during the art activity today. And then, being able to share the observation clearly and objectively. During the game, Joyce became frustrated and raised her voice. And so we're avoiding labels there and focusing like on what was observed. And then another way that I think can be calming and regulating for parents and grounding in, the order of events is explaining the support provided. Like give yourself, shine some attention, give yourself some credit for, how you like offered support. Um, like we helped her take a short break and practice calming strategies. And then collaborating on next steps. And so inviting them into that problem solving process. Like, have you noticed anything that helps when Joyce feels frustrated at home? Or again, perhaps if the support offered didn't quite meet the need or it's part of a greater pattern, that could be an opportunity to kind of say to the parent, that having some sort of individual plan or contingency, if like this, art just seems to be a really hard time for Joyce, that might be kind of your inroad to have that conversation with the parent. And so making sure that those conversations are happening in a private place and having opportunities for regular communication can be helpful. And also the importance of sharing positive updates too. I mean, I think sometimes even like if I call a family, like there's always this kind of like I could sense them holding their breath. And I sometimes like, oh, like I wanted to give a shout out, or like this is like put on your compliment sunscreen. Like this is a good one. And being able to have those moments to connect to so that the association with like the camp outreach home can be like a spectrum from positive to negative. And so Sam and I landed a lot of information at your feet. I'm going to move my screen around so I can see you. Any questions, comments, anything specific or brain sparks come up or questions?